Responsibility is not merely a word that carries moral weight. It is the cornerstone of civilization itself. Without it, chaos dominates, because responsibility is what binds human beings to meaning. A person who shirks responsibility does not escape suffering, but multiplies it. The West knows this truth, because it is the same principle that allowed it to rise in the first place. But when responsibility is taken up collectively by a billion people, the world changes. India, in 2025, is embodying this transformation. People are beginning to step forward, not only for their own lives but for the nation. Responsibility in such numbers becomes power, an undeniable force. That is what terrifies the West. If you examine history, you will see that civilizations that embraced responsibility prospered, while those that rejected it collapsed. Rome collapsed when responsibility turned into decadence. The Soviet Union collapsed when responsibility was replaced by ideology and lies. Now, in the West, responsibility is being rebranded as oppression, as though duty were somehow the enemy of freedom. But in India, responsibility is once again being reclaimed as a virtue. Education, discipline, and family are becoming central pillars for millions of individuals. This return to first principles is not accidental, it is deeply cultural. When billions orient themselves around order, the structure of the future is altered. That realization keeps Western thinkers awake at night. Responsibility transforms weakness into strength. A young man without responsibility is dangerous in his uselessness, but give him responsibility, and he becomes a force of order. The same is true for nations. India was once written off as poor, chaotic, and ungovernable. Yet through responsibility, families sacrificing for education, workers enduring hardship, innovators building in scarcity, the nation began to rise. The West saw this pattern, but dismissed it as temporary. They underestimated the compounding effect of responsibility on such a vast scale. They did not understand that resilience is the natural outcome when people voluntarily carry weight. Now, the strength of responsibility is visible, and it is unstoppable. There is also something profoundly moral about responsibility. When you take on responsibility, you admit implicitly that your life matters. You acknowledge that your actions affect others, and that the world itself requires your participation. In India, this acknowledgement is happening at scale. Millions of people are stepping into roles where their effort creates not only personal survival, but national transformation. This is not simply economics, it is metaphysics. The West, locked in debates over individual rights detached from responsibility, cannot grasp the depth of this movement. They see numbers and GDP charts, but miss the moral revolution beneath. Responsibility is moral order in motion, and it is reshaping the world. A society that elevates responsibility creates trust, and trust is the currency upon which everything else depends. You cannot build an economy if no one trusts the system. You cannot build communities if no one trusts each other. You cannot even build a family if responsibility is neglected. In India, there is a renewal of trust precisely because responsibility is being shouldered. Parents trust their children to rise, workers trust sacrifice will lead somewhere, and leaders are trusted to create stability. That is not perfect, but it is sufficient to create momentum. The West senses this momentum and feels its foundations shaken. A responsible population is a powerful population. Responsibility also brings meaning, and meaning is stronger than pleasure. A society obsessed with pleasure becomes fragile because pleasure is fleeting. The West has indulged in this fragility for decades. But meaning, derived from responsibility, endures through suffering. When an Indian farmer wakes before dawn, he is not chasing pleasure. He is embracing meaning, responsibility to family and land. When a student studies tirelessly for exams, she is not indulging pleasure. She is pursuing meaning through education. Multiply this by millions and you create a cultural force that does not collapse under stress. This pursuit of meaning terrifies the West, because they know a society anchored in meaning cannot be easily manipulated. You might ask why responsibility appears so terrifying to those who have already risen. It is because responsibility exposes fragility in systems that were built on convenience. When millions of Indians claim responsibility, they become competitors not in rhetoric, but in reality. They become scientists, entrepreneurs, thinkers, creators. They generate ideas and wealth that were once monopolized elsewhere. Responsibility, then, is not abstract. It is pragmatic. It shifts the balance of global power from those who consume to those who create. The West sees this and feels the ground beneath its feet tremble. A responsible India dismantles their narrative of superiority without firing a single shot. It is also worth noting that responsibility is contagious. One person taking responsibility inspires another. One family lifting itself through sacrifice inspires the neighborhood. One entrepreneur innovating under pressure inspires an entire generation. This contagion is visible across India today. The young see their elders working, and they rise. The educated see the uneducated striving, and they assist. The poor see the rich succeed through responsibility, and they attempt the same. This cascade effect is unstoppable once it begins. The West fears this not because it hates responsibility, but because it knows it cannot compete with responsibility multiplied by population scale. That is the real source of terror. Responsibility is not glamorous. It is hard, exhausting, and sometimes thankless. Yet it is the only path that leads upward. India's rise is not happening because life became easy. It is happening because millions chose responsibility despite difficulty. They chose to endure discipline, hardship, and sacrifice instead of despair. That is how nations rise, through voluntary acceptance of burden. And when the burden is accepted at scale, it creates a wave of resilience that no external force can easily disrupt. The West watches this process unfold, and though they may not admit it openly, they feel the anxiety of being outpaced by responsibility itself. Discipline is the foundation of destiny because it transforms potential into actuality. Every human being is born with chaos within, and only discipline can turn that chaos into order. The West fears India not because of its current achievements alone, but because discipline is beginning to emerge across generations. When millions discipline themselves to study, to work, to sacrifice, the trajectory of a nation changes irreversibly. Discipline is the refusal to live merely in the present moment of pleasure. It is the decision to endure suffering today for something greater tomorrow. That principle has shaped every powerful civilization in history. And now it is India's turn to demonstrate this truth to the world. This is not a trivial development, but a civilizational awakening. A disciplined society does not waste time on excuses. Excuses are the refuge of the weak, and weakness cannot build a future. When people take discipline seriously, they no longer ask what life owes them, but what they owe to life. India's millions are beginning to answer that question through hard work, through sleepless nights of study, through enduring the pain of effort. And this is precisely what terrifies the West, for comfort has made them complacent. The disciplined rise while the complacent fall, and history repeats this cycle endlessly. Every empire that has grown arrogant in comfort has eventually been humbled by the disciplined poor. India stands today at that threshold where poverty is being transformed into competence through discipline. That is the real revolution taking place in 2025. Discipline is not just an economic matter, but a psychological one. A disciplined mind is sharp, capable of focusing, capable of creating order out of chaos. Without discipline, even talent becomes useless, wasted in distraction. India is learning this lesson at scale, as millions discover that success is not luck but repetition, persistence, and sacrifice. Young people are waking up earlier, working harder, aiming higher. Families are demanding effort, schools are demanding rigor, and individuals are demanding more from themselves. This psychological transformation is far more terrifying to the West than statistics. A disciplined population becomes unstoppable because it refuses to collapse under pressure. And it is in this refusal that destiny is forged. The nature of discipline is paradoxical. It requires suffering, but it reduces suffering in the long run. If you avoid discipline, you pay with failure, chaos, and misery. If you embrace discipline, you pay with effort, but you earn competence and order. India is collectively making this choice. People are embracing pain voluntarily to prevent greater suffering in the future. That is why students prepare for years, why entrepreneurs endure repeated failures, why families sacrifice comforts. The West cannot easily understand this, for it has grown addicted to short-term gratification, but the disciplined do not seek comfort, they seek meaning. And meaning always requires sacrifice. That is the terrifying lesson India is teaching the world now. Discipline is also a weapon against chaos. Chaos exists everywhere, in economies, in politics, in personal lives. The only force that resists chaos consistently is discipline. A disciplined person can bring stability to a family. A disciplined society can bring stability to a nation. India's history has been filled with chaos, but out of that chaos now emerges discipline. That combination is deadly to those who oppose it, because chaos fuels creativity and discipline channels it into results. This synthesis creates innovation, resilience, and progress. The West fears this because they understand the power of such a union. A chaotic yet disciplined civilization is unpredictable and unstoppable, for it can adapt and endure simultaneously. That is India's path in 2025. The disciplined pursuit of knowledge is one of India's greatest strengths. Millions are turning towards science, technology, mathematics, and innovation with relentless effort. This is not accidental. It is a cultural movement toward competence. Competence terrifies the West because it erodes monopoly. If India produces disciplined innovators at scale, then the West no longer holds intellectual supremacy. That is why discipline is more dangerous than weapons. It creates the minds that shape the future. When students endure years of study, they are building arsenals of intelligence. When workers commit themselves to mastery, they are creating unshakable foundations. The West sees this and senses its grip loosening. Discipline has shifted the battlefield from power to competence, and India is rising to the challenge. Discipline also creates unity. A disciplined people are harder to divide, harder to manipulate, harder to weaken. Because discipline aligns individuals toward long-term goals instead of short-term conflict. In India, the diverse, chaotic society is being tied together through shared discipline, discipline of work, discipline of ambition, discipline of purpose. This unity is more terrifying than any army. The West has long relied on division, among others, to maintain dominance. But a disciplined society resists division because it is oriented towards something higher than petty disputes. That higher orientation is what creates destiny, and India, by choosing discipline, is beginning to unify its billion voices into a chorus of progress. It must be remembered that discipline does not remove suffering. It gives suffering meaning. Life is difficult, and no one escapes that reality. But discipline transforms difficulty into growth. A student studies despite exhaustion and emerges stronger. A worker labors despite hardship and builds resilience. A society embraces discipline despite poverty and lays the foundation for greatness. This is the pattern repeating in India today, and this is why the West trembles, because while they debate comfort and pleasure, India is learning to suffer meaningfully, and those who can suffer meaningfully can achieve anything. That is the truth no one can deny. The terrifying reality for the West is that discipline compounds. One disciplined person inspires another. One disciplined family uplifts a community. One disciplined community raises a nation. The exponential effect of discipline is unstoppable once it takes root. India has reached the point where discipline is no longer isolated but contagious. It is spreading across cities, villages, and generations. That contagion is creating momentum, and momentum cannot be easily reversed. The West has lost much of its momentum, consumed by distraction and comfort. India, however, has discovered the power of discipline at scale. And destiny, once again, is shifting eastward, carried by the disciplined hands of millions. Truth is the most dangerous weapon because it cuts through illusions, and illusions are the foundation of power. For centuries, narratives have been used to control perception, to convince people who is superior and who is inferior. The West built entire systems on the illusion of permanence, the illusion that their dominance was inevitable. But truth is relentless. When truth begins to emerge, it erodes these illusions, piece by piece. India's rise is grounded not in stories but in facts, and facts are the ultimate threat to narratives of superiority. When the truth becomes undeniable, it dismantles the lies that held the world captive. That is why truth terrifies the West more than anything else. The truth about India's growth is not hidden. It is visible in data, in innovation, in the sheer resilience of its people. But acknowledging this truth means acknowledging that the West no longer holds a monopoly on destiny. It means admitting that competence, creativity, and perseverance can thrive anywhere, even outside the traditional centers of power. The truth makes old hierarchies look fragile, and fragile hierarchies collapse quickly when exposed. This is not merely about economics, it is about perception. If the world sees the truth of India's rise, the myths that maintained Western dominance crumble. And myths, once shattered, cannot be reconstructed easily. That is the power of truth. It does not fade once spoken. Truth has always been dangerous to tyrants and monopolies because it resists manipulation. A lie requires constant maintenance. It must be reinforced endlessly. But truth exists independently of belief. The West can attempt to downplay India's growth, but the reality continues to advance. The skyscrapers rise, the innovations multiply, the intellectual output expands, the truth grows regardless of denial. And people, once they see the truth, cannot unsee it. That is why revolutions begin with truth, tellers, not warriors. Truth is contagious, and it spreads without force. India's truth is spreading across the globe, and it cannot be silenced by propaganda or ridicule. That terrifies those who rely on lies. The West has long been comfortable shaping the world through narratives of superiority. They framed themselves as the inventors, the pioneers, the civilized. Others were portrayed as followers, imitators, or backward. But truth disrupts this narrative completely, because truth reveals that intelligence is not confined to geography. Creativity is not confined to culture. Innovation is not confined to history. Truth shows that potential exists everywhere, and when unlocked through education and discipline, it flourishes. India is proving this at scale. The truth of billions striving toward competence is shattering the narrative of Western exceptionalism. And once truth shatters illusions, they cannot be easily repaired. This is why truth is feared. The relationship between truth and courage cannot be ignored. Speaking the truth is dangerous because it invites opposition. Living by truth is even harder because it requires discipline and sacrifice. Yet courage is the natural companion of truth. India's courage to face its challenges honestly is part of what fuels its rise. Corruption, poverty, inequality, these are truths that cannot be denied, but facing them rather than burying them is the path to growth. The West struggles with this because truth about its decline is uncomfortable. It is easier to hide behind rhetoric and ideology than to face uncomfortable reality. But truth demands courage, and those who face it rise. That is India's path today. Truth also aligns with meaning, because meaning cannot exist in falsehood. A life built on lies is empty, hollow, and fragile. A society built on lies eventually collapses under its own contradictions. But a society built on truth is resilient because it confronts reality as it is. India's rise is not being painted as perfect. It is acknowledged as difficult, chaotic, uneven. That is precisely why it is strong, because the truth is not polished, but raw and authentic. This authenticity creates trust, and trust is the lifeblood of progress. The West fears this because it exposes the hollowness of appearances. A truth-driven civilization creates meaning, while a lie-driven civilization creates collapse. The truth about suffering is also critical. Suffering is not something to be eliminated entirely, it is something to be understood. The West often sells the illusion that suffering can be avoided, that comfort is the ultimate goal. But truth reveals that suffering is inevitable, and the only path is to confront it with meaning. India's people know this truth because they live it daily. Their growth is forged through hardship, not luxury. That suffering, confronted truthfully, becomes a furnace for resilience. This terrifies the West because it reveals a hard fact. Comfort weakens, suffering strengthens, and those who embrace suffering truthfully become unstoppable forces in history. The most terrifying aspect of truth is that it demands responsibility. When you see the truth, you can no longer hide behind excuses. You must act in accordance with reality, or you are destroyed by it. India, by embracing the truth of its circumstances, has taken on responsibility at scale. It is building, innovating, striving, because denial is not an option. The West, on the other hand, often hides from truth by clinging to ideology or distraction. But truth does not wait for anyone. It advances regardless. The nation that faces truth survives. The nation that hides from truth decays. That is the brutal equation of history, and it is unfolding now before our eyes. Truth is also deeply spiritual. If your worth is in their hands, that it connects humanity to something beyond itself. Lies enslave, but truth liberates. In India, where spiritual traditions are ancient and deep, this understanding resonates culturally. The alignment of spiritual depth with practical truth creates a unique form of strength. It allows people to endure suffering with meaning, to transform chaos into order, to align their lives with something greater than themselves. The West, increasingly detached from truth in both spiritual and practical senses, cannot compete with this combination. That is why the truth radiating from India's growth is not just practical but transcendent. It carries a moral force that cannot be denied. The truth, once unleashed, cannot be contained. It spreads through action, through achievement, through undeniable evidence. India's rise is not a story that needs to be marketed. It is a reality visible to anyone willing to look honestly. This is why truth is the ultimate weapon. It does not require violence to win. It conquers through exposure, through visibility, through persistence. Lies fade when confronted with truth, and illusions dissolve. The West knows this, and that is why it fears India's growth so profoundly. Because once the truth is fully visible to the world, no amount of rhetoric, ideology, or propaganda will be able to stop the shift of history. Chaos is the natural state of existence, and order must be carved out of it with effort, sacrifice, and vision. Without chaos, there is no creativity, but without order, there is no stability. India has long been seen as chaotic, too diverse, too noisy, too unstructured to achieve greatness, but within chaos lies the raw material of transformation. Out of disorder can emerge innovation, resilience, and new forms of progress. The West often misinterprets chaos as weakness because they fear unpredictability. Yet unpredictability is also flexibility, and flexibility is power. India's chaos is not a liability but a foundation for order to emerge. That is what terrifies those who misunderstand it. Chaos challenges individuals to confront the unknown, and it is only through discipline that order emerges from it. In the West, societies have become orderly to the point of rigidity, where predictability has turned into stagnation. Innovation withers when everything is controlled and sterilized. India, however, thrives in unpredictability, where every problem is an opportunity for adaptation. The chaos of traffic, of languages, of religions, of economic disparity, all of it trains people to improvise, to adapt, to innovate under pressure. From that chaotic environment comes an extraordinary resilience, and when discipline is applied to that resilience, the result is explosive growth. The West cannot compete with a civilization that finds strength in chaos. Order born from chaos carries a unique vitality because it is earned, not imposed. The West's order was built through conquest, colonization, and control, but India's order is emerging organically. It is not perfection imposed from above, but harmony created from below. Billions of voices negotiating, arguing, struggling, and still moving forward together. That process is messy, but it is alive. True order is not sterile, it is dynamic. And India's dynamic order terrifies the West because it cannot be replicated by force or ideology. It is authentic, born from the lived reality of millions who know how to navigate disorder. This authenticity gives India a kind of strength that cannot be imitated. Chaos is also the birthplace of creativity. A perfectly ordered system produces predictability, but predictability rarely produces innovation. India's chaotic environment forces people to think differently, to solve problems with limited resources, to innovate against the odds. This ability to create under pressure is what produces breakthroughs. The West, accustomed to abundance and structure, often cannot match the ingenuity born in scarcity. Scarcity sharpens the mind, chaos sharpens the will. Out of that combination comes invention, and invention, multiplied by millions of creative minds, is a revolution in motion. That revolution cannot be stopped by fear, because chaos itself fuels the process. The West looks at this and trembles. Order is what allows progress to endure, and India is learning how to impose order without destroying the creative chaos that drives it. This balance is rare and powerful. Too much chaos leads to collapse. Too much order leads to stagnation. But the interplay between the two creates vitality. India's future is being forged in this delicate balance, where freedom and discipline coexist, where innovation and stability reinforce one another. That synthesis is difficult to manage, but once achieved, it produces unstoppable momentum. The West, leaning too far into rigid order, risks stagnation. India, embracing both chaos and order, risks flourishing. That is the real source of fear for those watching. It is important to remember that chaos has always been the crucible of greatness. Every great transformation in history began in times of upheaval. The Renaissance emerged after the collapse of old systems. America itself was born out of revolutionary chaos. But once greatness is achieved, societies forget the necessity of struggle. They cling to stability and comfort, mistaking it for permanence. India, however, has never forgotten chaos because it lives in it daily. That constant confrontation with disorder builds endurance. Out of endurance emerges wisdom, and out of wisdom emerges order. This cycle is repeating itself now, and the result is a nation capable of enduring what others cannot. Order born from chaos is not fragile, it is resilient. Systems imposed artificially collapse when challenged, but systems built organically can withstand immense pressure. India's democracy, chaotic as it may seem, survives because it reflects reality. The shouting, the disagreement, the disorder, all of it mirrors the true diversity of the nation. And yet, amidst the noise, there is coherence. Policies get made, progress occurs, lives improve. This resilience terrifies the West because they mistake noise for weakness. But noise is not weakness. It is evidence of vitality. A silent society is a dead one, but a noisy society is alive and strong. India's noise is the sound of emerging order. Chaos also forces humility, because it reveals how little control any individual truly has. And humility is a strength, not a weakness. It grounds people in reality, reminding them that survival depends on adaptation and cooperation. India's people know this intuitively because they live it daily. They cannot control every variable, but they learn to adapt. The West, obsessed with control, resists chaos and collapses when control is lost. India accepts chaos, adapts to it, and grows stronger. That adaptability terrifies the West because it means resilience cannot be broken by shocks. A nation that thrives in chaos is immune to crises. It bends but does not break, and that makes it unshakable. Order is meaningful only when it emerges from struggle, because it carries within it the memory of chaos. That memory keeps societies alive, creative, and resilient. India's rise is not sterile. It carries the texture of struggle, the noise of diversity, the unpredictability of democracy. It is not fragile order imposed from above but hard-earned order carved out of chaos. That kind of order cannot be easily undone. The West senses this difference and knows it is profound, because order born of chaos is not just practical, it is spiritual. It gives meaning to struggle and transforms suffering into progress. That kind of order is the foundation of destiny. The interplay between chaos and order is the essence of life itself. Too much chaos leads to disintegration. Too much order leads to suffocation. The secret is balance, and India is learning that balance at scale. Billions of people negotiating daily between unpredictability and stability, between freedom and structure, between creativity and discipline. This process is not neat, but it is alive. It produces resilience, vitality, and growth. The West fears this because it reveals that life thrives not in sterile perfection, but in dynamic struggle. Out of India's chaos is emerging a form of order that is adaptable, creative, and enduring, and that, more than anything else, terrifies the world.